The millionaire who left her at the altar returns. What he discovers about her will break your heart. The grand ballroom shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, a scene of opulence that could only belong to someone of immense wealth. The air was perfumed with the delicate scent of roses and jasmine, and every detail, from the golden chairs to the silk table runners, spoke of the touch of a millionaire. Claire Jenkins stood in the bridal suite, adjusting her veil as her best friend, Anna, fussed over her gown. Claire looked stunning in an ivory dress that clung to her figure, yet her smile was faint, her chest tightening with unease. Her fiancé, Richard Walker, a man known for his precision and control, was late. And as the minutes ticked by, a gnawing doubt grew in Claire's heart. Where was he? This was meant to be the happiest day of her life, but something felt wrong. And soon, Claire would realize that Richard's absence wasn't just a delay, it was the start of a betrayal that would shatter her world. What would drive a man to abandon the woman he claimed to love, and how would Claire find the strength to rebuild after being left at the altar? Stay with us to uncover Claire's journey, a story of heartbreak, resilience, and an unexpected second chance that will leave you questioning the true meaning of love and redemption. The grand ballroom glimmered with chandeliers, their warm golden light cascading onto rows of meticulously arranged chairs. The air was rich with the scent of roses and jasmine, the kind of luxury that could only be afforded by someone with immense wealth. Claire Jenkins stood in the bridal suite, her ivory dress hugging her figure perfectly, the veil cascading down her shoulders like a waterfall of silk. Her best friend, Anna, fussed over the hemline, a faint worry line etched into her brow. "You look stunning," Anna said, attempting to inject cheer into her voice. "Richard won't be able to take his eyes off you." Claire smiled weakly, but her chest tightened with unease. She glanced at the clock on the ornate wall. It was already 20 minutes past the time the ceremony was supposed to start. The room felt smaller with each passing second, the quiet murmurs of guests from outside slipping through the cracks of the door. "Where is he?" Claire whispered, gripping the edge of the dressing table to steady herself. Anna hesitated, her hands smoothing the fabric of her dress nervously. "You know Richard. He probably got held up making everything perfect. He loves you, Claire." But Claire wasn't convinced. Richard Walker was a man of precision and punctuality, traits that had built his multimillion-dollar empire. Being late wasn't his style. She remembered their last conversation 2 weeks ago, his eyes distant, his voice laden with a weight he hadn't fully shared. "Do you ever feel like we're rushing into this?" he'd asked, his hand brushing hers lightly. "Rushing? Richard, we've been planning this for months," she'd replied, trying to hide her rising panic. He'd smiled then, but it was thin, like a thread about to snap. "I just want us to be sure." Now, standing in the suite, Claire felt the weight of his words press down on her chest. The door creaked open, and the priest stepped in, his face solemn. Claire's heart sank even before he spoke. "Miss Jenkins, I'm sorry to inform you. Richard isn't coming." The room tilted. Her legs felt like jelly, and she gripped the table harder to keep herself upright. Tears spilled down her cheeks, streaking her makeup as the weight of the words settled over her like a heavy shroud. "This can't be happening," Claire whispered, her voice trembling. "It has to be a mistake." Anna rushed to her side, her arms wrapping around Claire's shaking frame. "Claire, don't." But Claire was already moving, her dress rustling as she pushed past the priest and burst through the doors into the aisle. The gasps of the guests filled the air as she ran, her vision blurred by tears. Outside, the parking lot was nearly empty except for a few scattered cars and the hum of a city bus passing in the distance. "Richard," she called, spinning in place as if he might suddenly appear. But the only answer was the cold breeze brushing against her skin. Across the street, hidden in a sleek black car, Richard watched her. His suit was immaculate, but his face was pale, his expression pained. His phone sat in his hand, his mother's voice still echoing in his mind, "This marriage will ruin you, Richard. Think of your future. She's not what you need." His fingers tightened around the phone as he watched Claire collapse onto the curb, her dress pooling around her like a wilted flower. He wanted to go to her, to explain, but guilt rooted him in place. Instead, he looked away, his jaw clenched as the driver started the car. That night, Claire packed a single suitcase and boarded a bus to nowhere in particular. The city she had once called home now felt suffocating, filled with memories too painful to bear. The bus rumbled into the night, carrying her farther from the life she thought she'd have. The small town Claire landed in was a far cry from the glittering city she had left behind. The streets were lined with quaint shops, the air filled with the scent of freshly baked bread from a nearby cafe. She found a modest room to rent above a bookstore and took a job serving coffee at the cafe below. Each day was a struggle to keep moving forward, but she forced herself to adapt. The scars Richard left weren't visible, but they ached with every quiet moment. 2 months later, Claire's life took an unexpected turn. Morning sickness and fatigue became her constant companions, and a home pregnancy test confirmed what she hadn't dared to suspect. She sat on the bathroom floor of her small apartment, staring at the positive result. Fear and hope warred within her. "How am I supposed to do this alone?" she whispered to the empty room, her hand instinctively resting on her flat stomach. The weeks that followed were a blur of adjustments. She made a plan, scrimped and saved, and prepared for her future as a single mother. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment during her first ultrasound appointment when the doctor turned the screen toward her with a kind smile. "Congratulations, Claire. You're having quadruplets." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt again. "4," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "Yes," the doctor confirmed. "You're going to have your hands full, but you'll find a way." The words were meant to reassure, but Claire's mind raced. 4 babies. How would she manage? She left the clinic clutching the sonogram printout, her emotions a chaotic swirl of fear, love, and determination. She doubled down on her efforts, saving every penny, working extra hours, and finding a small house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and it would be enough for her family. As her pregnancy progressed, the town began to take notice of the young woman preparing for an extraordinary challenge. Some offered support, while others whispered doubts behind her back. But Claire didn't care. Her resolve only strengthened with every passing day. When the day of delivery came, it was as if the entire town held its breath. The labor was grueling, but Claire's heart swelled with uncontainable joy when she finally held her babies, 4 tiny, perfect boys, in her arms. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered their names, Lucas, Noah, Liam, and Oliver. As she cradled them, the weight of her past seemed to lift, replaced by an overwhelming sense of purpose. "You are my future," she whispered to them. "And I'll never let anything hurt you." Little did she know, her past wasn't done with her yet. The years passed quickly, yet each day seemed endless for Claire. The once quiet house was now filled with the chaos and laughter of 4 rambunctious boys. Lucas, the curious one, always asked why the sky was blue or how birds learned to fly. Noah, shy but deeply affectionate, clung to her side during thunderstorms. Liam, the family jokester, made her laugh even on the hardest days, while Oliver, the leader, kept his brothers in check with the confidence of someone far older than his 5 years. Life was challenging, but Claire found solace in the rhythm of her routine. She worked tirelessly, juggling 2 part-time jobs to make ends meet. Her days were filled with early morning breakfasts, school drop-offs, and bedtime stories. Despite the exhaustion, the smiles on her boys' faces made every sacrifice worthwhile. On one crisp autumn afternoon, Claire took the boys to the local park. The air was cool, leaves crunching underfoot as the boys chased each other around the playground. Claire sat on a weathered bench, sipping coffee from a thermos, her gaze drifting as she soaked in the simple joy of the moment. That's when she saw him. Richard. He sat on a nearby bench, his tailored coat and polished shoes sharply contrasting with the casual warmth of the park. His once clean-shaven face now sported a light stubble, and his dark hair was slightly tousled. For a moment, Claire thought she was imagining him, a ghost conjured by fatigue and buried memories. But then their eyes met. Richard froze, his gaze flickering between Claire and the boys playing just a few feet away. The resemblance was unmistakable. Claire felt her heart drop into her stomach as realization dawned on his face. The coffee in her hand turned cold as her grip tightened around it. She stood abruptly, calling out to her sons. "Lucas, Noah, Liam, Oliver. Time to go home." "But Mom." Lucas whined, holding on to the monkey bars. "Now," she said, her voice firmer than usual. As the boys gathered their things, Claire felt Richard's presence before she saw him. He approached cautiously, his voice soft but carrying years of regret. "Claire." She turned to face him, her expression carefully blank. "What are you doing here?" I didn't know," he stammered, his gaze shifting back to the boys. "Are they mine?" Claire's chest tightened. She had anticipated this moment for years but had never truly prepared for how it would feel. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "They're yours." Richard took a step closer, his face a mix of disbelief and guilt. "Why didn't you tell me?" "You walked away, Richard," she said, her voice tinged with anger. "You left me at the altar and disappeared without a word. I was humiliated. Alone. Pregnant. What did you expect me to do? Chase after you?" He flinched at her words, his hands stuffed into his coat pockets. "I made a mistake, Claire. I know that now." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "A mistake? You call abandoning me a mistake? I raised these boys on my own, Richard. I worked day and night to give them a life. And now you show up, thinking you can waltz in and make things right?" "I didn't know, Claire," he said, his voice breaking. "If I had known." "But you didn't want to know," she interrupted, her voice rising. "You didn't even have the courage to say goodbye." The boys stood a few feet away, watching the heated exchange with wide eyes. Claire noticed and softened her tone, her gaze hardening as she looked back at Richard. "You have no right to disrupt our lives." "I just want to know them," Richard said quietly, his eyes pleading. "Please, Claire. Give me a chance." Claire hesitated. Every instinct told her to protect her boys, to keep Richard at arm's length. But a part of her, the part that had once loved him, wondered if it was fair to deny her children the chance to know their father. She sighed heavily. "I don't trust you, Richard. Not yet. If you want to be part of their lives, you'll have to prove it." Relief flashed across his face, but Claire wasn't finished. "You'll meet them on my terms. No surprises, no overstepping boundaries. Understand?" He nodded eagerly. "Anything you need." "Thank you, Claire." The following weekend, Claire allowed Richard to visit their modest home. The boys were curious but hesitant, unsure what to make of the man who seemed both familiar and foreign. Richard brought gifts, not flashy or expensive, but thoughtful. A puzzle for Oliver, paints for Noah, a book on dinosaurs for Lucas, and a soccer ball for Liam. The boys warmed to him slowly, their laughter growing louder as the day went on. Claire watched from the doorway, her arms crossed. She hated how easily Richard seemed to fit into their lives, how quickly the boys began calling him Dad, without fully understanding the weight of the word. After the visit, Richard lingered, helping Claire clean up the scattered toys. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "For giving me this chance." "I didn't do it for you," Claire replied, her tone cold. "I did it for them." Richard nodded, understanding her bitterness. "I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to try. For them. For you." "Don't," she said sharply, her gaze piercing. "This isn't about us. It's about those boys." If you hurt them, I swear I'll never forgive you. Over the next few weeks, Richard became a regular presence in the boys' lives. He attended soccer games, helped with school projects, and even joined them for Saturday morning pancakes. The boys adored him, but Claire remained guarded, her trust slow to rebuild. One evening, as Richard tucked the boys into bed, Oliver looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Dad, are you going to stay forever?" Richard's throat tightened, and he glanced at Claire, who stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. He knelt by Oliver's bed, his voice steady. "Yes, buddy. I'm here to stay." For the first time, Claire felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Richard was telling the truth. But deep down, she knew their journey was far from over. Claire stood in the doorway of her modest kitchen, watching Richard as he sat at the dining table with the boys. They were working on a school project, each boy contributing in their own unique way. Lucas explained facts about dinosaurs with his usual enthusiasm, Noah meticulously painted the papier-mâché volcano, Liam cracked jokes to lighten the mood, and Oliver, the leader, directed the entire operation. Richard fit seamlessly into the dynamic, encouraging and guiding them with a patience Claire never expected. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax, to imagine that this was how things had always been. But as the boys erupted into laughter over Liam's exaggerated impression of a T-Rex, reality pulled her back. Richard had only been back in their lives for a few months, and while his intentions seemed genuine, Claire couldn't forget the years he had missed or the pain he had caused. After the boys went to bed that night, Richard stayed behind to help Claire tidy up. The kitchen was warm and quiet, the hum of the dishwasher the only sound as they worked side by side. Claire handed Richard a plate to dry, her movements brisk and efficient. "Thank you for today," she said, breaking the silence. "The boys had a good time." Richard nodded, setting the plate on the counter. "I enjoy spending time with them. They're incredible kids, Claire. You've done an amazing job." Claire's hands paused, gripping the edge of the sink. "It hasn't been easy," she said quietly. "There were nights I didn't know if I'd make it. But they kept me going." Richard's voice softened. "I'm sorry for not being there. I know I can't change the past, but I want to make things right. I want to be the father they deserve." Claire turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of skepticism and vulnerability. "Words are easy, Richard. Promises are easy. What happens when it gets hard? When they need more than just Saturday visits and school projects? Will you stay?" His gaze didn't waver. "I'll stay," he said firmly. "No matter what." Despite her reservations, Claire began to notice a shift in their lives. Richard's presence brought a sense of stability the boys had never experienced before. He didn't just show up, he was fully present. He helped with bedtime routines, attended parent-teacher conferences, and spent hours teaching Oliver how to ride a bike without training wheels. But Claire remained cautious. Trust, she knew, was not built overnight. One afternoon, Richard invited the boys to a local park for a kite-flying adventure. The sun was warm, and a gentle breeze made it the perfect day for the activity. Claire decided to come along, sitting on a bench as she watched from a distance. The boys' laughter echoed across the open field as Richard guided them, his own kite soaring high above the others. Liam ran up to Claire, his cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mom, look! Dad's kite is the highest." Claire smiled faintly, nodding. "It is, sweetheart. Go join your brothers." As Liam ran back, Claire's smile faded. She hated how easily the word "Dad" rolled off their tongues, a title Richard had yet to earn in her eyes. Richard noticed her watching and walked over, holding the string of his kite in one hand. "They're happy," he said, his voice gentle. "That's what matters, right?" Claire crossed her arms, her tone guarded. "Happiness is fleeting, Richard. Stability is what matters. And I'm here to provide that," he replied. I know I can't erase the past, Claire, but I'm trying to build a future. She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the boys chasing their kites. Richard sighed, stepping closer. Claire, he began hesitantly. I've been meaning to tell you something. She turned to him, her eyes narrowing. What is it? He hesitated, his jaw tightening. I've spoken to a lawyer about formalizing my role in their lives. I want joint custody. Claire's breath caught, her chest tightening. Joint custody? You think you can just show up after 5 years and claim rights to my boys? They're my boys too, he said evenly. I'm not trying to take them away from you, Claire. I just want to be a part of their lives. Her voice rose, anger bubbling to the surface. You don't get to waltz in and demand custody after abandoning us. Do you have any idea what it's been like raising 4 children on my own? I know I don't deserve forgiveness, Richard said, his tone desperate. But I'm not the man I was back then. I want to do what's right. Claire shook her head, her emotions overwhelming her. What's right? You think disrupting their lives is what's right? They deserve to know their father, Richard said, his voice firm. And I deserve a chance to prove I can be there for them. The days that followed were tense. Claire couldn't stop thinking about Richard's words, the fear of losing her boys gnawing at her. But as much as she wanted to push him away, she couldn't deny that the boys had grown attached to him. One evening, Lucas approached her while she was folding laundry. Mom, he said hesitantly, is Dad staying forever? Claire looked at her son, her heart aching. I don't know, Lucas. But I promise, no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. Me too, Lucas said with a small smile. But I think Dad wants to stay. His words lingered long after he left the room. The next weekend, Richard arrived with a surprise. He had brought materials to build a wooden playhouse in the backyard. The boys were thrilled, and Claire reluctantly agreed to let him stay for the project. The backyard buzzed with activity as Richard worked alongside the boys, teaching them how to hammer nails and measure wood. By the end of the day, the playhouse stood proudly, a tangible symbol of the effort Richard was putting into their lives. As the boys played in their new hideout, Richard joined Claire on the porch. Thank you for letting me do this, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. I know I have a long way to go, but I hope this is a start. Claire nodded, her gaze softening. It's a good start. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, Richard was here to stay. Months passed, and the tension between Claire and Richard eased. He became a fixture in their lives, proving his commitment through actions rather than words. The boys flourished under his presence, their laughter filling the once quiet house. One evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Richard turned to Claire. I owe you more than I can ever repay, he said quietly. For raising them. For giving me a chance. Claire met his gaze, her walls beginning to crack. You owe it to them, not me. Just don't let them down again. I won't, he promised. As the stars twinkled above, Claire felt the weight of the past begin to lift. There was still work to be done, wounds to heal, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. Together, they were building something new, something stronger. And for the boys, that was all that mattered. As the sun set over the backyard, casting a warm glow on the wooden playhouse Richard and the boys had built together, Claire leaned against the porch railing. The sound of her children's laughter mingled with the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. For the first time in years, the weight on her chest felt lighter. She glanced at Richard, who was carefully helping Liam tie his shoelaces, and saw not the man who had left her at the altar, but someone striving to earn his place in their lives. This wasn't the life she had envisioned years ago, standing in her wedding dress, waiting for Richard to appear. It wasn't perfect, and the road ahead would still hold challenges. But it was real, built on the pieces of their broken past and the shared determination to create something better for their boys. Claire had learned that forgiveness didn't erase pain, but it opened the door for healing. And Richard had discovered that being present wasn't about grand gestures, but about showing up every day, ready to give all he could. The message is clear: life doesn't always follow the script we write for ourselves, but resilience and the courage to rebuild can lead to something even more meaningful. Love isn't about perfection, it's about commitment, effort, and the ability to grow together despite the scars of the past. What do you think about Claire's journey? Would you have given Richard a second chance? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming and inspiring stories. Hit the notification bell to never miss an update, and type "family" in the comments if you believe in second chances and the power of love.